In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the armature on a DeWalt grinder. The armature is the central portion of your grinder's motor. It's made up of some copper windings, as well as the commutator bars where the brushes ride. Typical failures of the armature are caused when the grinder is overloaded. The windings become so hot that the insulation on them melts and the armature shorts out. When this happens, it'll need to be replaced. Replacing it is easy to do, and we're going to show you how. Let's get started. We'll begin by removing the side handle and the guard. This will just make disassembly easier when we go to separate the gear case from the housing. Next, I'll separate the two halves of the rear housing. Next, I need to pull the brushes away from the armature. To do that, I'll pull the brush wires away from the holders, pull this tension spring out of the way, and then pull the brush arm back. And I'll repeat this on the other side. Now I need to remove the separator fan from the rear of the armature. It just simply screws on, but it is a reverse thread. And to remove it, I'll need to lock the motor from spinning. To do that, I'll just use the spindle lock up on the gear assembly. And now I can remove the fan. Next, I'll separate the gear case assembly from the motor housing. It's secured with 4 screws. Now I want to separate the armature from the gear case assembly. At this point, they're just connected by a bearing that's pressed into the gear case. So I'll just pull the two apart. Now we can install our new armature assembly. The assembly includes a new pinion gear, front bearing retainer plate, the armature itself, the rear bearing, and the bearing cup. I'll just insert the pinion gear into the gear case assembly. As I do this, I want to make sure that I align these tabs with the slots in the gear housing. And now I'll slide the armature and gear case assembly back into the motor housing. And I'll secure the gear case housing to the motor housing with the screws. Now I can reinstall the separator fan. Remember, it's a reverse thread. And again, I'll lock the motor from spinning using the spindle lock. Now I'll reposition the brushes back onto the armature. Reattach the brush wire. And repeat this on the other side. Now we'll replace our rear housings to the motor housing. And then I'll take a moment and make sure all the wires are tucked out of the way so nothing gets pinched when we put the other half on. Now we'll replace the lock button. This tab on the button needs to face towards the armature, followed by the paddle switch, and then the other half of the housing. As I do this, I want to make sure that the posts on the switch and on the lock button all line up properly with the housing. Once I get it in place, I'll just test everything real quick to make sure it's right. That looks good. So now I can re-secure the screws. And now I'll reinstall the guard and the side handle.